Well, today is Thursday, October 31st in 2024, and we obviously welcome you to our Chapter 49 podcast. Now, why is this an important date for any particular reason? A couple of reasons. Number one, it's Halloween. Now, Duncan and I usually record on Fridays, but folks, we just couldn't resist the temptation to have a podcast on Halloween Day. So we've done that. But you're going to have to allow me a point of personal privilege because this is also the birthday of my lovely wife, Jane. So I never had any excuse to forget my wife's birthday because it's on Halloween. But anyway, Chapter 49, we welcome you to our podcast. We represent most IRS employees in the state of Indiana, and we welcome back Duncan Giles, our chapter president.
Thanks, Larry. As always, it's good to be here, and please extend my and everybody else's good wishes to your great wife, Jane, on her birthday, on her
Yes.
50th birthday.
Say that again, please.
On her 50th birthday, or 40th, or 30th, whatever works for her.
She'll enjoy whatever number you want to throw out there. That's fine. I think the big we're gonna have a little gathering later in the day here locally, but the thing that she's going to get best is she's going to spend a little time with our 4-month-old granddaughter. So that's one of the biggest presents that she can get. Of course, I get that as well. So let's move on and talk about our subjects for this podcast. And this is our last podcast, more than likely. That's something, hopefully nothing comes up where we would have to come in with an emergency. We've only done that a couple of times in the whole history of 4 years or so doing this podcast. But this is most likely going to be the last podcast we post before Election Day. We've talked about this a lot, and we want to make sure everybody understands it now. Early voting has been going on in many states. In my state of Indiana, I voted early. I waited an hour and a half in line to early vote. My understanding is there are many other polling places that have even longer waits than that. There's a reason we have up to 4 hours for either early voting or voting on election day, because the lines can get long. Now, we want you to have the time to vote. Now, if you don't have take much time to vote, you just take the time you need to vote. But sometimes you're going to have to wait in line. So that up to 4 hours is there for a reason. We don't want people to abuse it, but we also want people to understand that is there for a reason. We want federal employees to vote, and that's why that executive order was issued, and that's why NTEU supplemented that with the Memorandum of Understanding for IRS employees, and NTEU's done that for other agencies represented by this union. So, Duncan, kind of a reminder about the 4-hour rule that we have for voting.
Yeah, and first off, I want to thank the president for his executive order allowing up to 4 hours to vote, because I think it's very important that folks do get out to vote. As a reminder for employees, you get up to 4 hours. That doesn't mean if your polling place for whatever reason it only takes you 10 minutes to get there, 30 minutes to vote, 10 minutes to go back home. That doesn't mean you get to take the rest of the 3+ hours as just time. You'd have to go back to work. So only use that time that you need to vote. For managers, and I've seen scattered things across the country where they've been denying it or saying it's not, you don't need that much time, or my favorite, I want proof you voted. No, just no. If there are any managers out there that are watching this, or executives, please be aware that at this point, chapters have been told to send any denial issues all the way up to the head of HCO for them to investigate this. That's how serious this entire service is taking your right to vote. So we want to make sure that people do get the time to vote. Please don't abuse this. But if you need the time, and as Larry was saying, hour and a half, and I've heard other places in central Indiana have 2+ hours in line. I've heard from different places in the country where people are in line at least 4 hours. But the 4 hours is what you get. In addition, if you are working the polls this year, you do get up to 4 hours of admin time to do that work as well. So just want to make sure that everybody is aware. And as Doreen said last week, have a plan to vote. How are you going to do this? Where are you going to do it? What day? What time? Are you going to do early voting? Are you going to wait until the day of? Whatever it is, have a plan to vote. Take the time you need up to, again, the 4 hours so you can make your voice heard, because this is an extremely important election, as they all are.
Yeah, let me clarify one thing that I think may be subject to confusion as far as the poll worker issue is concerned. Some poll workers are unpaid and some poll workers are paid. In Indiana, there are some poll workers, you don't get paid a lot, but you get paid for working the polls. So it depends on the type of appointment you have. Like if you're working for a political party to watch it over, you may not be paid for it. But if you're working for in Indiana, the county clerks handle the administration of the elections, and you may get paid a small amount. It's not a lot, make it $100 or something. It's something in that neighborhood. So if you want to take this additional leave to work at the polls, we are talking about unpaid time working at the polls, correct?
You get administrative time. You get 4 hours of administrative time. So that would be paid time that you would get. It's not leave without pay. It is administrative time, just as it is. You get the admin time to vote. You would also get the admin time to work the polls. Now, depending upon where you are, some of them do them in shifts. I've worked in my younger days. I worked basically every job there is to work at a polling place, and those would be 12+ hour shifts. So, you'd have to take time off of your own time off as well if you're doing that. But you get up to 4 hours to if you're somebody that checks people in, make sure the ballots go in the right place, that sort of thing. Make sure everybody is in line properly, those sorts of things. You would get up to 4 hours of paid administrative time to do that.
Okay, very good. Good to have that clarified because I know there are some people who do take that civic responsibility very seriously, and you've done it in the past working at the poll. I did that when I was a very young guy, but gosh, I was in my teens, I think, or whatever. Did it one time. It was a very interesting experience, I must say. We also said several weeks ago that during these podcasts that we have up to election day that we would say something about the Hatch Act. So this again is likely to be our last podcast before election day. Now, what we need to keep in mind is that as a couple of things I think we need to keep in mind, and I want to hear more from you on this. Number one is that, sometimes tempers get short as we get close to or on election day. And if we have controversies after election day, which is possible because some of these vote counts don't even start for early voting until election night. In Indiana, we count the votes ahead of time and release it on election day for early voting and absentee. A lot of states are not even allowed by law to start the count. So it may be several days after election day before we know the official results. So there's always the possibility of some tumult in the days after the election. So I think, Duncan, you might want to just remind people to keep your cool and either on or after election day, wherever it may be in around election day, don't let any of this partisan political discussion seep into the workplace, whether it's what you wear or what you say.
Oh, that is so well put, Larry. Yeah, you don't want to, again, wear anything that is backing a political party or a political someone running for office, a political candidate. And, there's going to be people who are going to be very upset especially after the presidential election, one way or another. There are going to be people that are going to be very upset. There are going to be people that are going to be ecstatic. Either way, you don't want to bring this into the workplace. You don't want to rub it in other people's faces. You don't want to create incidences that could lead not just to Hatch Act violations, but potentially, go even further than that into conduct issues due to, whatever may happen. So just remember, keep a cool head. We're going to get through this. Everybody needs to vote according to their conscience, what they think is best for themselves, their family, and their country. You're going to need to do that. I may not agree with your vote, but I will defend to the death your right to do so because that's part of our democracy. So you don't want to come off in the workplace. Now, after work, after hours, if you're having a meeting with friends, coworkers, or something like that, you're not on federal property, you're not, on federal government time, anything like that, and you want to have discussions about it or talk about it, absolutely. Just don't do it on federal government time, on federal government equipment, or on, federal government property, which if you're teleworking, those rules are going to apply to you for the Hatch Act. So even though you're at your home, for Hatch Act purposes, if you're on government time, that's going to be considered government property again. So you don't want to get into those political discussions wearing, paraphernalia that identifies with a party or a candidate, anything of that nature, that could end up being an issue or a controversy.
This might be a good time to remind people. You talked about the telework issue. Remind people about the rules surrounding use of social media.
Yeah, that's one of those things where you can absolutely say on, Facebook, Twitter, I'm still going to call it Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is, you can absolutely voice your political opinion, who you're voting for, who you're voting against, things of that nature. You do not want to do that on government time. And God knows you don't want to do that using a government computer. Most of that stuff is blocked anyway, but you don't want to do it there. So just remember to be responsible. This is stuff that should not interfere with your job. We are, not something that you ever want to get involved in during government work time is a political discussion of any type.
One other thing that we need to talk about surrounding the election, and this just came up in the last few days, there's some concern now about what may happen on or after Election Day. There's when you work for an agency like IRS, there's always some possibility that there could be some kind of a flare up. People get angry. I mean, I managed taxpayer assistance centers, and I walked in and people are very upset. It could be about anything. But there is some concern, and it's coming from people within the federal government or law enforcement arm, our safety arm, the people who look out for the safety of federal employees at every agency. What may happen post-election in terms of threats against federal employees, offices worked by federal employees? Uh, I know that Doreen Greenwald, our guest last week, will talk more about following up on what she told us last week, but I would really like to hear from you on what we are beginning to understand from agencies like IRS. And Doreen Greenwald, our national president, has been at the forefront of that, making sure that federal agencies plan ahead to make sure we are ahead of any possibility of any threats that could be made to offices or individual employees. What do you know about that so far?
Yeah, I can tell you that from what I've heard, there is some chatter that there could be, I don't know whether you want to call them disturbances, protests, anything of that nature after the election. And our national president, Doreen Greenwald, as you mentioned, our national vice president, uh, Terry Scott, have both emphasized to IRS, um, you know, both nationally, and we've done so locally, to make sure that employee safety is paramount. And we're especially concerned about folks who are working, not working telework. Usually if you're in your home, you're not going to be that impacted by somebody doing a protest. If you're in a building that has an IRS office, be it a lease space or a government office, there could be, we just don't know. And as recently as Monday, I was in a meeting with Taxpayer Services where Doreen and Terry both emphasized very clearly that we need to make sure that the people that are in the building are taken care of. And these are folks who, basically cannot telework. When you're talking about people in the service centers, that are doing things that they can't telework. Folks in our TAC offices, our walk-in offices, who have to be there. Other people that are in the federal buildings, we want to make sure that, or lease space again, we want to make sure that IRS is very mindful of what could possibly happen and have plans in place to if something does start in one part of the country, that they are very quickly to make sure that everyone across the country is safe. And from what I understand, Commissioner Werfel is very mindful of this and has been listening and monitoring it closely as well. They're working with us, from what I understand. So we just want to make sure that everyone is safe during this process. I wish it didn't have to be this way, but after the events of the last election, and I'm sorry, January 6th was abhorrent, and I don't want to see that happen in DC or anywhere else across the country. But if it does, I want to make sure, as the national NTU does, as my brethren across the country do, want to make sure that everyone is safe and protected from something like that.
Well, it's good to know that Dorian Greenwald and our National Vice President, Terry Scott, also are talking to the agency about this. And, I have to say that having worked for my 28 years of working for IRS, there are some commissioners I would have confidence would be on top of this. Some I wouldn't, but I do think that Danny Werfel will be on top of this. I do think he cares about the safety of the workforce, and it's good to hear that he and our national leadership are on the same page with this. So. Again, if you start getting information from your management chain or your union officials, it's because we're all watching this, and hopefully there'll be no need for any follow up. But it's garnered the attention of people at the national level. Let's move on to our podcast of last week. We're very honored to have Doreen Greenwald, our national president of NTEU, with us, and she had a lot to say about the paper inventory that has been assigned to our call centers, particularly 1040X cases, but there are others, as I understand it, and the lack of training that's available to these people to work these cases that they're being assigned. Obviously the agency has the right to assign work, and NTU has no problem with that. We understand that under the law, but the management does have a responsibility to train people up to the point where they can work the cases and the work that has been assigned to these employees. Training is still a huge issue. I know that when you and Doreen were talking about this a little less than a week ago, you did mention that there were going to be some talks with the top management people about this. So have there been any developments on this whole issue of training up our call center people to do this paper inventory and getting the proper training? Has anything happened since we last talked Friday of last week?
I would say there have been discussions. I wouldn't say developments. I was with Doreen and Terry and some other great chapter presidents. Our national director of negotiations, Ken Moffett, and our negotiator, Randy Ralston, who's in charge of taxpayer services, our deputy director of negotiations, on Monday in a meeting with taxpayer services heads. And this was one of the topics that we got into. And training overall, we realize, and we've been pushing locally, nationally, that it needs to improve. It needs to be better. The 1040X for account management remote sites just has been, as I said in the meeting, this is probably, in my close to 3 decades of service with the government, probably the worst training rollout and implementation I've ever seen. And the responses that we were getting back, especially from folks high up in taxpayer services, were the same things that we've been hearing, and are extremely disappointing. That's about the nicest way I can say that. Extremely disappointing. Well, we need to see specific examples or hear about specific examples. I'm sorry, your training sucked is going to be able to cover that quite nicely. You can get into details about, it was rolled out too quickly. There wasn't enough time. Their folks weren't communicating well between instructors and folks who are being taught, being rushed to do it, all sorts of manner of things in this. but to hear the same thing, well, we need to see specific examples. Specific examples have been given to all sorts of levels in taxpayer services, and we just need to make sure employees aren't harmed by poor training. It doesn't matter whether it's a CSR, whether it's somebody in TAS, whether it's a revenue agent, whether it's a revenue officer. We need to make sure that anybody who's going to be doing a particular job or particular aspect of their job gets the proper training. And we have not seen that in so many cases. And in this one, like I said, this is a huge glaring example of the 1040X training that the folks in the remote sites got. It was something that we've been pushing for years. Great in theory, can really help out the service, but the implementation has just been Hindenburg-like, is the best way I can describe it. And it's just something that we need to improve, and they need to not pay lip service to it, but basically, as I told them, you need to scrap this and start freaking over to do it right.
So should I define Hindenburg-like for the people who don't know history very well?
Absolutely, feel free.
The Hindenburg was one of the greatest air disasters in the history of aviation, and I'll just leave it at that. It was pretty bad. One of the great, I'm a great, I worked in radio broadcasting for years. One of the great recordings ever made was the description of the Hindenburg catching fire. I mean, it was like unexpected. And this man who was just really supposed to just describe this wonderful event of the Hindenburg landing in America saw the thing go up in flames. And it's chilling to hear that. It was so when you say Hindenburg like, it's like the worst disaster you can imagine. Okay,
Yep.
let's say that. Just to clarify one point, the management says they want examples. Explain how NTEU at every level has provided specific lists of examples as to how this training is not meeting the needs of the employees.
Yeah, employees have sent emails to their managers about where the training has fallen down, what they don't understand. When people are, saying that they are losing sleep, that they are crying at night over this, that yes, they got certified, but it was by sheer luck and they have no idea what they're doing. And when they send it to us and we send it on up to IRS upper level management, as well as different teams that are working on training or employee experience or accounts management, whatever it might be, and they still say they want more examples. The examples have been out there. The examples are out there. And I'm really tempted to say, for the particular person who asked for more examples, that talk to my chapter presidents that are impacted across the country and say, just tell your employees to send all their specific examples to this one person. If they want to get thousands of emails describing how bad this is, we can do that. If that's what they really want, we can do that. It's sort of like Miracle on 34th Street, where they said, okay, show us proof you're Santa Claus, and the post office comes in and starts dumping envelopes on the judge's desk right there. We can do that with email if that's what they truly want, because the examples are out there. People are so unhappy, it's unreal, and with good reason.
One item I think we need to talk about before we wrap this up, and that has to do, with a proposed piece of legislation that just came to light, I think the day before we record this. Duncan and I have been involved in representing employees through our work with NTEU, and there have been a lot of crazy pieces of legislation that have been proposed in the Congress that would be adverse to federal employees. The latest one, I think, may take the cake. So, Duncan, explain this government employee impediment bill that has been, and I guess it's just a proposal now, but who knows after the election where it may go. Explain this piece of legislation and what it will and would not do.
Yeah, this is one of those things where somebody forwarded it to me. I read this and I'm like going, are you bleeping kidding me? Basically, what it wants to do is, go after employees who are impeding the will of the president. And, I'm sorry, and like I said, in my nearly 30 years, I have never seen any government employee impeding the will of the president. I have seen them following directives. I have seen them making suggestions. I have seen them pushing back because something may not be workable or may not be legal. But there has been no impediment of any sort. So this, to me, is just another slap in the face to federal employees to try and, we're the civil service. We are not backing any one party. We are not backing any one person. We are here for the American taxpayers to do the job that the American taxpayers want us to do. It doesn't matter whether we are in the IRS, whether we are in Customs and Border Protection, whether we are in the FDA, the SEC. It doesn't matter where we are. We're supposed to be doing this for the protection of the American taxpayer, for helping the American taxpayer, for doing the work that needs to be done. And for some congressperson to come up and say, well, we want to make sure that the will of the president, well, sometimes the will of the president, regardless of party, may not be legal. It may not be following the law, and those, I'm sorry, we are sworn to do that, uphold the law. And that's what we should continue to do. So when you see things like this that are targeted at federal employees, as you can tell, it really upsets me because there's, as an employee sent to me, a solution in search of a problem. And that's what this absolutely is. It's purely political. And I have no time for things of that nature.
Well, very well said. I don't think I could say anything more except, 28 years in federal service as a rank and file employee, a union official, and 6 years as a manager. I mean, I have sometimes agreed with or disagreed with edicts that came down from the president's chain of command. I have never seen anyone try to impede a legal order from a president. And even if it is illegal, it's a process for that too, if somebody's going to question the legality. So this idea that there's some kind of deep state that's trying to impede any president just baffles my mind. It has not been my experience, nor has it been the experience of my father when he worked in civil service for, I don't know, 40, 50 years of his working life. So I just, this idea the deep state is impeding a president, I've never seen it. And if it's out there, give me examples because I don't know of any. With that, we're going to move to Duncan Giles and have him give us his final comment.
Well, I've got two final thoughts today, both very different. The first one, as folks can see, I'm representing today, as my wife would say, for the LA Dodgers, who just won the World Series. That we're recording this the day after they won. I've been a Dodgers fan for well over 50 years. My best friend when I was very young was a Giants fan. Their rival was the Dodgers. And that's how I became a Dodgers fan. Those many years ago, I bleed Dodger blue. And I just want to, congratulate the Dodgers on a great series. The Yankees were a worthy opponent, as they always are when we face them in the series. And I'm glad that the boys in blue pulled it out. My second thought is, every election is important. Every single one is important, but this one I feel is extremely important. Please, 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 as Doreen said, make a plan to vote. Get out there and vote. We want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, that, the will of the people, that's what we need to have, the will of the people. How do you find the will of the people? It's not through protests. It's not through riots or anything of that nature. It's at the ballot box. That's where it needs to be. And we need to have everyone get out there and vote. I trust the election system. I'm sorry. I know there are folks out there who say, well, it's fixed and all that. I would beg to differ, and so would juries and judges in lawsuits that have been filed. The American system of voting has shown to be darn near perfect. It's not gonna be perfect 100%. No, there's nothing is. But this is the system we have. This is what we need to do, and we need to get out there and vote and make our voices heard.
Very well said, Duncan. I appreciate that. And echo those comments, and it is time to vote and vote the way you feel you should vote. And I want to congratulate the Dodgers. I'm kind of a National League fan. I'm not a Dodger fan, but I'm certainly not a Yankee fan. I'm sorry for you Yankee fans who may be watching or listening. Can never been a Yankee fan. And I think it was wonderful that the Dodgers received this wonderful gift of 3 errors in 1 inning to give the Dodgers a comeback after being down 5-0 in the fifth inning. But we won't get into the details. Uh, Dodgers are a very good team, and I'm very happy for their fan base. My final comment, I'm going to do something a little different. I mean, Indiana is known as a basketball state. We love our college basketball, IU, Purdue, even Butler University here in Indianapolis has had some good years. We just love our basketball. We have our Indiana Pacers in the professional league. Which the fan base there is very loyal. So basketball, high school basketball, particularly for anybody who's ever seen some of these movies like that have been made about Indiana high school basketball. It is part of the culture in the state of Indiana. But I want to talk about somebody else. This is a page out of the Guinness record book. There's a man from Canada who is now going to the University of Florida. His name is Olivier Rio. I think obviously a French name. He is in the Guinness Book of Records because his height 7 feet 9 inches. 7 feet 9 inches. The first question is, does he plan to play basketball? The answer is yes. So I think if you can watch a University of Florida basketball game, he's a freshman. I'm not sure how much he'll play this year, but he's eventually going to get some playing time. He is taller than any other teenager that's been recorded in the world, taller than all these other players you've heard about, Manute Bol, Yao Ming, all these others. He's taller than any of those. So just something to watch if you're a basketball fan. It's Olivia Rio, and he is going to the University of Florida, and he will eventually be playing basketball there. Duncan Giles, again, congratulations to your Dodgers. Thank you all for watching and listening to the Chapter 49 podcast. We try to keep it weekly, as much as we can, and we hope to be back next week with a post-election look at what the election may or may not do for people working for the federal government. My name's Larry Lannan. Duncan Giles joined me, so please be safe and be kind.